Adaptations can be a tricky process, since to adapt is to change numerous things to fit within the medium it's entering. Some undertake a challenge to make something work in a limited time, and some can be so different that they might as well be something else entirely. But as much as I want an adaptation to be faithful, I've always been more focused on whether or not it works on its own merits. Sometimes creative license can lead to an interesting new side of a story, as much as it can potentially damage it, or lead to a much more enriching and positive experience to viewers just as much as it can displease them. Yet I come to a fork in the road when it comes to the anime adaptation of Watashi ga Motenai, you know what, I'm just gonna call it Watamote, which is adapted from the manga of the same name and is directed by Shin Onuma, director of F, A Tale of Memories, Bakura Test, and my guilty pleasure C3, and lists Takao Yoshioka as series composer, which is interesting considering that he was also involved with Elfen Lied, wrote Icky and High School DxD. Now in the case of Watamote, coming from a manga that was all about short bursts of dark humor and bits of satire on the nature of socially awkward people, the anime goes in a rather different direction that leads to a more intimate outlook on its subject matter, using its medium to dig further into the rabbit hole. Lots of creative liberties have been taken with this adaptation, but does it work? You'll have to hear me out when I give you my evaluation of Watamote to know the rest.
文化祭とかでこういう未来もあったのかな。
The setup for Watamote revolves around a teenage high school girl named Tomoko Kuroki, our socially awkward, misanthropic, delusional, clumsy, and occasionally angry protagonist, who seeks to fulfill the ambitious goal of being popular, attempting at every turn to a variety of results that deviate from what she envisions in her head, normally for the worse, and the person to blame is none other than herself. This is the main source of Watamote's dark humor. From avoiding social confrontations to believing she has what it takes to be a hostess, plans crumble, and emotional consequences are sometimes felt, as Tomoko goes through life knowing little of making it work. Along the way is a cast of characters whose roles depend on the premise the episode throws at us. Tomoki Kuroki, Tomoko's apathetic little brother, serves as an alternate viewpoint and sees a different side of things that his sister can't. Yu Naruse, Tomoko's nerdy middle school friend turned voluptuous hottie from a different school, who remains optimistic though maybe ignorant of her friend's social predicament, as well as more minor cast members that contribute to the episodic setups accordingly. And that's, more or less, what Watamote consists of from beginning to end. Watamote doesn't follow an expanding plot per se, but instead builds scenarios around its own premise on a single narrative plane. Each episode presents these scenarios which follow a selection of topics, but use the same formula to weave them. And it's here where I go into my own stance on this adaptation. For one, when things get to the spirit of Watamote, dark humor and all, I can tell you that they managed to translate it from the page, if not build upon the manga's telling of events by combining elements from multiple stories at once, as well as serving a double purpose to fill an entire episode's worth of content. It also sinks deeper into another region of Watamote's premise, and that region is Tomoko herself. This anime takes a vastly different direction in this regard. It's closer, level-headed, and sympathetic. Its moments of observational attention to Tomoko's character shedding light upon an element that was once merely a tool to enact a punchline or an event that's based around her character for amusement. It's in these moments where this new direction is felt most, and displays the contrast between the anime and the source material. From Tomoko reminiscing about her past or witnessing the after effects and consequences of the many negative actions she takes, it all pieces of Watamote that's less focused exclusively on humor and more focused on the nature of the premise itself. They are well structured and generate the intended effect, using the outcomes to speak with visuals rather than just words, and sometimes speak louder than words. It's this sense of knowing when to tell what a character is feeling and when to show it that makes this anime's direction appealing in areas. And yes, this even applies to the humor as well, the satire, parodies, and hooks wielding sparks of energy. The direction isn't without its faults, unfortunately. Due to Watamote having to be, well, Watamote, the overall package, because it's episodic and requires different setups, doesn't allow as much general development as I would be comfortable with. And even with hints of development, it's not long-lasting. Watamote was never a series that bloomed with thematic substance, sticking to a quota that needs to be filled. But what needs filling is what I question. It's an adaptation, which means, to some capacity, it has to carry over the elements that make up the source to begin with, when it would have worked better as something else entirely. You see, the manga interpretation of Watamote is less a character piece with dark comedy, as it is a straight-up satirical dark comedy that throws its humor in short but amusing doses. It's simple entertainment that even has the guts to be crude in places. She's socially awkward and wants to be popular, LOL. It's a series that's made from a single setup and one setup only, and the story is pretty much lacking. Yet, that's actually not as bad as it sounds, because each chapter gets to the point with its many uses of the premise, and the hook was to find out what scenario is being used and how it's executed. It's fun, quick, clever, maybe a bit mean, but hey, it's dark humor. Of course it'll be a little mean mean to exploit a character who doesn't fathom the weight of her actions. The anime, on the other hand, tries for a more psychological, dramatic, and consequential route, casting a spotlight on this hikikomori girl who makes bad decisions without fully grasping the realities for the sake of getting an emotion out of us, and after a while, you just feel bad. And if this is what the Watamote anime was going for, it succeeds in my eyes. But that's all it really has, feelings and humor for the viewer, despite taking plenty of liberties to do more than what the manga was doing, without the source material's luxury of getting to the point in a short time frame. Chapters of Watamote are around 10 plus pages on average, while the episodes are 20 plus minutes. This was never in-depth or thematically abundant to begin with, the Achilles heel of this anime, and while I respect the refocusing, it doesn't add much underlying significance to it. It's about a lazy social outcast wanting more out of life, planning misguided plans, seeing those plans backfire, and so on. Which means, as an anime tasked with spreading its runtime to a full TV anime length, it grows more and more stale by each episode. As I said, the manga is primarily quick entertainment, but the anime wants to be more than that. But as an adaptation of an amusing, varied, but thematically lacking manga, it has to stick to the formula, which means every time we get an effective character moment here and there, it spontaneously goes back to being Watamote, the wacky dark comedy with little inherent substance and development to boot. So as much as it digs into Tomoko, it can't deviate too far from the tree, or else it won't be Watamote, which plants speed bumps on the proverbial road, restricting a thriving narrative needed to sustain interest. The manga was not plentiful in terms of substance, and that flaw carries over here. Look, I praise Watamote for not going the short anime route of being 5 or 10 minutes per episode, pulling resources to craft an experience that adds rather than subtracts or does nothing at all. And there is some success with the direction. It's also a bland anime when you come right down to it. Its only source of fuel in the form of a setup that fails to gain much traction. That said, it's not a bad anime either. The show could engage you, and the things Tomoko does either leave you charmed or leave you pitying her. I actually care for her, related to her, even feeling the rare sense of worry during one of the episodes. The humor, when it gains legroom, can entertain you, and the previously talked about character moments do leave their mark and are easily the best parts of the anime, as well as the other characters being some good fun in some areas. Watamote is not unlikable. It's just not an anime you can have a long discussion about, realizing that there wasn't much to express, explain, or interpret over time. You just go through it, episode by episode, and the only words you need to say are, Watamote is still Watamote, and you don't want videos repeating the same sentence verbatim, right? Produced by Silverlink, Watamote won't shed precious golden nuggets on your eyes and ears, but it will give you a sight that brings the pages of the manga to life, getting the job done, as it should for an anime like this. For what genres Watamote covers, it's no surprise that the visuals don't impress most of the time. Sure, when the personal stuff starts and we enter Tomoko's mind and perspective, the art direction for these set pieces do a good job at reflecting the character's own anxieties, hopes, and misconceptions, plus some moments outside these set pieces do attract your attention. It's not a totally ugly anime, it's just nothing special. Coloring is okay, animation is a hair above average, and the designs of the characters seem to be a mix of the original designs from the manga, while refining them to add a custom look that makes them softer, rounder, more symmetrical, less rough, which transfers over to the numerous facial expressions Tomoko herself has. Downsides to the visual presentation includes the CG, which looks kinda bad, and something else I'm conflicted with, and it's that background characters can be bafflingly incomplete, either being grayed out, faceless, or both. Now one could speculate that this is either an intentional stylistic choice to separate figures of importance and those who are not, fitting with the theme of isolation from those unknown to you, definitely a trait of Watamote, or it's a mere budget-saving measure that has nothing to do with that. Either way, it just makes the world feel static and dead whenever they appear. Sound-wise is where the experience of reading the manga and watching the anime separate, to the show's benefit. Not to say the voice acting is spectacular, or the music to be irresistible. Performances fulfill their purpose, and the soundtrack fits the intended moods, even if it can sound a little generic half the time. Then again, I couldn't find the musical score and was unable to listen to the tracks on their own, so judgment is incomplete on that aspect. But they gave the anime adaptation a distinct presence, and proves to be a far cry from illustrations and text, thanks to actors at the task of selling these twistedly humorous, emotional, maybe even troubled stories the premise generates. Tomoko's actress is the highlight, providing the nerdy, shy, angry, somewhat psychotic, and lazy persona she inherits, with a performance vocalized by a nasally, panicky, and irritated voice that matches the character like a final piece to a puzzle. Combine the visuals and the audio presentation together with everything else, and you have a Watamote anime that takes elements from the manga and makes it its own. An experience that's been made for itself. It's just weird thinking about the lighter and more comedic manga, and witnessing the more intimate and melancholy but still funny in a twisted fashion nature of this anime. The last time I felt like this was when I finished reading Electric Sheep after watching Blade Runner, or more recently, when I watched the film adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird after reading the novel. The differences are there, and it doesn't always completely work thanks to limitations, but what it lacks in permeating and influence, it almost makes up for in its vision for what is otherwise a bland anime. I'll admit that I got a kick out of it, and if you like the manga, you may like it too. Adaptations have to make compromises, but they could also make a distinct experience, and Watamote does that in strides, so I can forgive the chains of which thine is harnessed to. So no, Watamote is not perfect, but it's admirable, for it tries to be something else.